On April 30, 1998, a night of jealousy and rage spiraled into one of Texas's most unforgettable crimes. At the heart of it stood Charles Victor Thompson, a man whose possessive grip and violent temper would end in bloodshed and a death sentence. His ex-girlfriend, Denise Hayslip, had finally broken free from his toxic control, rebuilding her life and finding new love with Darren Cain. But Thompson wasn't ready to let go. That night, he stormed into Denise's home with a gun in hand. In moments, Darren Cain lay dead and Denise, clinging to her last breath, managed to speak the name of her killer, sealing Thompson's fate forever. The courts would convict him of capital murder and sentence him to die, yet the story took an even darker twist when Thompson staged a daring jail escape in 2005, briefly tasting freedom before being recaptured. Now, after decades of appeals, his execution date is finally set, January 28, 2026. To understand the full detail of this chilling story, we have to go back to where it all began. But first, hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next jaw-dropping true crime story. Charles Victor Thompson was born in 1970 in Houston, Texas, and by the late 1990s he was 28 years old, restless, volatile, and already known for his temper. His early years were marked by instability, a lack of clear direction, and a growing tendency to lash out when things didn't go his way. Those who crossed paths with him often recalled a man driven by jealousy and control, traits that would eventually consume him completely. In the mid-1990s, Thompson entered a relationship with 28-year-old Denise Hayslip, a woman full of warmth and energy who longed for stability and a fresh start in life. At first, their romance looked promising, but it quickly took a darker turn. Behind the surface of affection, Thompson's need for dominance became clear. Friends described the relationship as abusive and suffocating, with Denise struggling under the weight of his control. By early 1998, after enduring too much, Denise made the decision to end things with Thompson, a step that took courage, but also one that would place her directly in the path of danger. In the months that followed, Denise began seeing 30-year-old Darren Cain, a man remembered as kind, reliable, and protective. To those close to them, Darren represented the fresh beginning Denise had been seeking. Together, they tried to move forward, finding happiness in one another's company. But to Thompson, this new relationship was a dagger to his pride, fueling the deep resentment already boiling inside him. By the spring of 1998, tensions had reached their peak. Thompson's jealousy grew unbearable, and he couldn't stand the idea of Denise moving on without him. He stalked her, obsessed over her, and voiced his anger to those around him. His world narrowed to one destructive focus: if he couldn't have her, no one would. This deadly triangle, Charles Victor Thompson spiraling deeper into rage, Denise Hayslip determined to reclaim her independence, and Darren Cain, simply loving the woman he cared for, would violently collide on the night of April 30, 1998, in an act of brutality that ended two lives and set the course for decades of legal battles, failed appeals, and ultimately a death warrant in Texas. On the night of April 30, 1998, what began as another ordinary evening inside a modest Houston apartment would spiral into a tragedy that would forever alter the lives of two families. According to court records and police reports, Charles Victor Thompson, consumed by anger and jealousy, made his way to the home of his former girlfriend, Denise Hayslip, where she was spending time with her new partner, Darren Cain. Thompson, determined to confront them, entered the apartment in a fit of rage. What unfolded next was a chilling sequence of events pieced together through courtroom testimony and witness accounts. Inside the apartment, Thompson confronted both Denise and Darren. Words quickly turned into violence. Armed with a firearm, Thompson raised his weapon and fired directly at Darren Cain. The shot struck with fatal force and Darren collapsed, his life ending almost instantly. In a matter of seconds, Thompson then turned the gun on Denise, pulling the trigger again. The bullet tore through her body, leaving her gravely wounded. But Denise did not die immediately. Fighting for her life, she was rushed to the hospital, where doctors and nurses worked desperately to save her. In those critical moments, her will to speak the truth overcame her pain. With what strength she had left, she identified her shooter by name: Charles Thompson. That dying declaration, recorded by medical personnel and later repeated in court, became one of the most powerful pieces of evidence in the case. Investigators later testified that the crime scene told the story of Thompson's rage: the spent shell casings, the blood on the floor, and the silence left behind after two lives were destroyed. Prosecutors would later present these details in vivid clarity to the jury, pointing to the merciless way Darren's life was taken and to Denise's final words: which echoed from the hospital room straight into the courtroom. Her killer was the man she had tried to escape. This single night, brutal, fast, and unforgiving, not only ended 2 lives but also set into motion the long legal battle that would carry on for decades, as Charles Victor Thompson would soon be charged with capital murder, tried in a Harris County courtroom and sentenced to death. The trial that followed in 1999 at the Harris County Criminal Courthouse became a dramatic courtroom battle. Prosecutors presented a powerful narrative, a man driven by rage who could not accept rejection, choosing to end 2 lives in cold blood. They leaned heavily on Denise's dying words, the forensic ballistics linking the bullets to Thompson's weapon, and testimony describing his violent behavior leading up to the murders. In closing arguments, the state painted Thompson as a dangerous and possessive killer, arguing that his actions were deliberate and calculated. The defense, on the other hand, attempted to soften Thompson's image, hinting at his troubled background and unstable emotions, suggesting that what had happened was more the product of an explosive moment than premeditated intent. But in the end, the jury was unmoved. After deliberating on the evidence, they returned with a verdict: guilty of capital murder. What came next was sentencing. In Texas, a capital murder conviction carries only 2 options: life imprisonment or the death penalty. After hearing further testimony about Thompson's lack of remorse, his violent tendencies, and the impact on the victims' families, the jury reached its decision. The sentence was death. Courtroom sketches from the time captured Thompson sitting at the defense table, flanked by his attorneys, while prosecutors stood firm in their arguments. According to reports, family members of Denise and Darren wept quietly as the sentence was read, a moment that underscored the gravity of the trial's conclusion. For them, justice had been delivered, though it could never restore the lives lost. By the end of 1999, Charles Victor Thompson had officially joined the ranks of Texas's death row inmates, his name etched into state records as another convicted killer awaiting the ultimate punishment. By 2005, 6 years after his conviction and death sentence, Charles Victor Thompson sat on Texas's death row, awaiting the slow grind of appeals, when he pulled off one of the most audacious jailbreaks in Harris County history, an escape so bold and unexpected that it stunned law enforcement and grabbed headlines nationwide. According to official reports, Thompson managed to slip away from the Harris County jail by exploiting a weakness in the system. He fashioned a fake identification badge, posed as his own attorney, and with an alarming level of confidence simply walked out of the facility. For several hours, no one realized that one of Texas's condemned inmates had disappeared into thin air. Once outside, Thompson didn't flee across the border or vanish into obscurity. Instead, he moved around Texas and Louisiana, making a series of phone calls, attempting to contact old acquaintances, and reportedly trying to rekindle connections with friends and possible supporters. For a brief moment, he tasted freedom, living on borrowed time, knowing that every law enforcement agency in the region was now on high alert. The manhunt was swift and relentless. Authorities tracked his movements and followed leads until, just a few days later, Thompson was recaptured in Shreveport, Louisiana, without incident. The short-lived escape had ended, but the damage to the justice system's reputation had already been done. The story dominated Texas news, with headlines branding Thompson as one of the state's most notorious fugitives. His brazen walkout raised urgent questions about jail security, oversight, and how a death row inmate could so easily outwit the system. And for the public, his escape became a chilling reminder of how even the most dangerous criminals, under the right circumstances, could slip through the cracks of justice. After Charles Victor Thompson's shocking 2005 escape and swift recapture, the legal saga surrounding his case entered an even more complicated chapter. His original death sentence, handed down in 1999, was overturned by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals in 2004, a year before his escape, on technical grounds related to improper jury instructions during the punishment phase of his trial. This ruling did not overturn his conviction for capital murder, only his punishment, forcing the courts to schedule a resentencing hearing that would once again decide his fate. That resentencing trial finally took place in 2009 inside a Harris County courtroom, where tension was palpable as the families of both victims watched closely. Prosecutors presented the crime in chilling detail once more, reminding the jury of Darren Kane's sudden execution-style death and Denise Hayslip's heartbreaking final words naming Thompson as her killer. Beyond that, they introduced evidence of Thompson's manipulative behavior while incarcerated, including his brazen escape by posing as his own attorney, to argue he remained a continuing danger to society. The defense countered by portraying him as a man capable of rehabilitation, insisting that the errors of his first trial had deprived him of fairness, and that his remorse should weigh against another death sentence. After more than 2 decades of legal battles, retrials, appeals, and a life defined by violence and notoriety, the case of Charles Victor Thompson reached its final and irreversible stage when the state of Texas officially scheduled his execution for January 28, 2026, inside the Walls Unit in Huntsville, the same facility that has carried out more executions than any other prison in the United States. The announcement of this date brought a wave of emotions. For some, it was relief that justice, long delayed, might finally be delivered. For others, it reopened old wounds, forcing them to relive the pain of that April night in 1998 when Darren Cain lost his life and Denise Hayslip drew her last breath after naming Thompson as her killer. Legal analysts quickly stepped forward to explain what this meant in practical terms. While the execution date was firm, Thompson still technically had access to the narrowest of legal pathways, such as last-minute habeas petitions or federal appeals, but the consensus among experts was that his chances were slim. His case had already been reviewed extensively by both state and federal courts, with every appeal denied and every plea for clemency rejected. As one analyst noted, at this point, unless there is some extraordinary legal development or intervention from the Supreme Court, the scheduled execution will move forward as planned. For the families of the victims, the date represented something they had been waiting for over 27 years: closure. Darren Cain's relatives, who had watched countless hearings and sat through Thompson's sensational escape story making headlines, expressed both exhaustion and relief, saying they wanted nothing more than for justice to finally be carried out. Relatives of Denise Hayslip echoed the same, remembering her not as the tragic figure in a true crime story but as a young woman who had been trying to move forward in life before it was violently stolen from her. As the clock ticked down to January 28, 2026, one thing was certain. The story of Charles Victor Thompson had come full circle, from a jealous and violent act of rage in 1998 to a scheduled execution that promised to close the book on one of Texas's most notorious death row cases. And that brings us to the end of the tragic and chilling case of Charles Victor Thompson, a story of love, jealousy, murder, escape, and ultimately justice nearly 3 decades in the making. But now I'd love to hear from you. Do you believe the death penalty truly delivers justice, or does it only continue the cycle of loss? Should Charles Thompson's execution bring closure to the families, or would life in prison without parole have been the better punishment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be reading and responding to as many as I can. And if you found this story compelling, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next jaw-dropping true crime documentary.